Welcome, Thrivers, to this week's episode of Women Thriving in Business podcast. My guest today is Alicia Butler Pierre. Hi, Alicia, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Nikki. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You are so welcome. I'm excited to have you here and learn all about your business, Equilibria, and also about your experiences. So we'll just get right to it. So tell us all about your business and what got you started on your entrepreneurial journey.
Well, my business is, as you just mentioned, Equilibria, and it's been around, Nikki. It's coming up on 18 years, which is scary. I say scary because it's like, where did the time go? I literally remember day one, and it's flown by so fast, but we specialize in creating business infrastructure for fast-growing small businesses. What does that mean? Well, it means we take a look at the people, the processes, and all of the tools and technologies that are needed to run your back office operations, and we help you figure out how do you link all of those things together to form a stable foundation upon which you can not only just grow your business, but actually scale it in a sustainable, profitable, and repeatable way. The way I got started, I relocated from New Orleans, Louisiana to Atlanta, Georgia back in 2005. And I came here, Nikki. I was working as an engineer. That was my former career, working as a chemical engineer. I relocated to Atlanta. And when I came here, I had just completed my MBA. So I came to Atlanta looking for a job. And that didn't happen. And after about 2 months, it didn't take me very long to get tired of what seemed to be endless, soulless job searching, that I decided, you know what, for the amount of time, effort, and energy that I'm spending looking for a job, working for someone else, I can redirect that same time, effort, and energy into creating an opportunity for myself. Now, I should preface that by saying, it just so happened at that time, the universe works in very interesting ways. I happened to be reading a lot of books, articles, even documentaries that I might watch, all of these things, Nikki, that were telling me or communicating the message that we're all born with natural skills, talents, and abilities, but through our process of quote unquote education, we're really taught to get outside of the things that come to us very naturally. Again, so that we can go and work for someone else. But what if you could figure out a way to create a business that is viable, that can sustain your basic needs as a human being, but it's centered around those things that you are naturally skilled at and talented at, because that's where your joy and your passion lies. And anytime you have, as you know, Nikki, that joy and that passion, there's no limit to what you can do in life. So that, in a quick nutshell, is what Equilibria is and how my entrepreneurial journey started.
I love that. So first of all, congratulations on 18 years. That's like having your child grow up and be ready to go to college, right? So I love that. I'm sure you have lots of stories to share with us about those 18 years. So definitely want to get into that. I love your origin story that you were looking for a job and really realized that energy, that time, that your talents could actually be better served by creating your own business. That you saw that lack of success in securing a job as an opportunity.
Yes.
And I love that, because as I think back on many times in my career path before I started my own business, when I was doing career transitioning and looking for a job, and I was successful at securing a job. And now as I think about it, I'm like, that was a great time for me to be starting the business. That was a great time. And, I know everything happens in the time that it should. I think having that mindset at that point would have been the push I needed. So I'm glad and just excited to hear that you answered that nudge from the universe. When some people might have seen it as, oh no, I can't find a job. You were like, oh, well, this is just the universe telling me there's another way to be successful. I love that. What were some of the challenges that you faced as you were getting started as an entrepreneur?
One of the first challenges was I was in a brand new city. I knew one person, Nikki, when I moved here, and that is the God honest truth. So I had to first meet people. I had to literally build that network from the ground up. And I started by attending different networking events. And I would go to Office Depot and buy those little Avery business card template, that pack of business cards that you can stick into
Exactly.
a printer. And I just said, I'm going to call this company Equilibria. It was actually a professional organizing company when it first started, because that was my natural skill, talent, and ability, was organizing things. And so I started a professional organizing company. And I literally just had my name, Equilibria, on there. I think of phone numbers, just the standard information you would put on a business card. I would print those out. I would go to these networking events and I would barter quite a bit because no one knew me, no one could vouch for me. I didn't have any testimonials from customers or clients at that point. I was literally starting from scratch. And over time, eventually those materialized into paid opportunities. But that was definitely the number one challenge when I first started, was I didn't know anybody. And I had to build that network. And by joining these different networking groups that would meet fairly regularly, that was how I started to build that base of contacts.
I love that. As you were getting started, so you talked about having come from an engineering background. What have been your experience and your education into that point? How did you infuse that into this burgeoning business?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you so much for asking that, because I love being able to show how the dots connect. Because I think sometimes, and I know with you being a transformational and career coach, Nikki, you know this all too well, but sometimes people would ask me, well, how did you go from being a chemical engineer to a professional organizer? Make it make sense. And truthfully, they're both about process, to be honest with you, Nikki. So it just so happened my organizing clients, the people that I attracted, these were not people who were hoarders by any stretch of the imagination. They certainly were not even chronically disorganized. I would say at least 90 to 95% of them operated home-based businesses. So it wasn't that, again, that they were chronically disorganized, they weren't hoarders, but they did need systems and processes in place so that they could keep their business-related information separate from everything else going on in the house. And what I realized was it wasn't about making things look pretty. It wasn't necessarily about making it look aesthetically better. It was more about, hey, now that it looks better, quote unquote, more organized, how do I know I won't revert back to a chaotic mess 3 weeks from now? And that's where the process comes into play. And as a chemical engineer, I worked as a process engineer. So I went from studying flow of chemicals or fluids through pipelines to studying the flow of work and information through a business. So to me, those concepts and those basic principles that I learned in engineering, I was just able to figure out how to apply those same concepts and principles, but to the world of business.
I love that. That definitely connects the dots. That makes so much sense. If you think about organizing, particularly your business, but life in general, like, okay, as you talked about being a chemical engineer and what is the flow? How do these inputs flow through all the things that need to happen in order for you to get the actual outputs that you want? And I think oftentimes there's a disconnect. Like, we think it's magic. We think
Right.
it's like alchemy, like wave a wand and then these things come out. You understand the chemistry behind it and then what has to be done in order to make that happen on the other
That's
side. So
right.
I love that as it applies to business.
Nikki, when you said inputs and outputs like that, that's how we describe processes. As you said, people just know that there's a box and there's stuff that's going on inside of that box. And you have, again, things going into that box. Something magical happens inside of that box, and out comes this great, beautiful result, whatever that result is. whether you're delivering a service or you're actually producing a tangible good or product. That is literally what process work is all about.
Mm-hmm. Starting off organizing and then realizing there's a process. Can you talk to us a bit about why having a handle on your processes is so important, particularly for a small business, but if you're looking to grow, why is that so important? And why is that so difficult for folks to understand?
I'll share something with you that I usually share with people. And I just had a conversation yesterday with someone about it because she did not see the value in processes. And I said, think about your favorite meal at your favorite restaurant. What if the chef actually told you the ingredients for making that meal and you went home and you attempted to replicate it? Chances are it might not come out the way that it would if you were at that restaurant. There's several reasons. A big one is you don't have the instructions. You have the ingredients, but what's the actual recipe? What are the actual steps? And it could be that there's a certain type of oven that has to be used. There's a certain temperature that something has to be cooked at. And if you don't know those details, you literally will not be able to reproduce that meal the same way that it's produced or delivered at that restaurant. That is what a process is. It is nothing more than recipes for your company's operations. How do you do what you do? And how can you document it in such a way that whether I do it, Nikki does it, or someone else does it, we will roughly produce the same result, no matter who actually does the work. That's what processes do for you. It ensures consistency in the way that you provide your services or produce your goods. Think about your customers. Your customers get to know your products and services a certain way. And if there's variation every single time they make a purchase, they're not going to be customers for very long. They get used to something being a certain way. And then all of a sudden, if there's a change or a shift and your product, the quality of it, for example, becomes inconsistent, they're not going to keep patronizing your business. So that's what processes do for you. It's literally providing that blueprint for how do we actually produce our goods and how do we deliver our services in a consistent, valuable way. And hopefully there's high quality in there as well. The reason why I think so many people don't understand the value is because we need to rethink what processes actually are. I think a lot of times when people hear it, Nikki, they think it's complicated. They think it's something that's only reserved for the big guys, the large corporations and large enterprises. That doesn't apply to me as a small business, but it absolutely does, especially as you start to build a team and you add more people to your team. You can't communicate telepathically to them. They have to know not only what work to do, but how to do that work. And that's what processes afford us as entrepreneurs and business owners, is that ability to be able to get information out of our heads onto proverbial paper. I think another part of it too, Nikki, is when I talk about rethinking processes, I think so many of us think of those bulky operations manuals that used to sit on a shelf. And you have these standard operating procedures that are inside of those operating manuals that nobody looks at. It's collecting dust. It takes forever to try to update anything in those manuals. But if we instead start thinking of, hey, you know what? I can use something as simple as my phone. I can speak into my phone. I can actually record audio. I could use Zoom. There's so many technologies that we have at our fingertips right now that where we can just start dictating what we do and how we do it. We can use a transcription service. And then next thing you know, you have the beginnings of some type of process. In other words, you're getting that information again out of your head and into a format that can easily be shared with other people. And I'm a huge advocate, by the way, of using video to do that.
Alicia, you said so many gems. I love this analogy of processes being a recipe, that hits home. That's very visceral. I think a lot of small businesses are operating on the improv model of, yeah, we do
Yes.
it this way this time, and the next time we may change and tweak. And that's not to say that you don't evolve and grow, but it can't be different every time you do it.
Right.
It should not be a new experience every time you do it. That's great in improv. It's not great in business. And then that idea of being telepathic, I think we as entrepreneurs really believe that everyone can read our mind. And
Hmm.
while we may be telepathically communicating, it's not making it over. It's not making it.
That's right.
While our skills and abilities may be great, everyone else is not able to pick it up.
Think about it. Then we have the gall to wonder, well, why didn't so and so do this the right way? We're so quick to blame other people without taking a look at ourselves. I always tell people, blame the process before you blame the person. Because again, it's so easy to get frustrated. We're busy, we're super busy. Things might be a little chaotic. You need help, you bring people on, but you have to take the time to train them, to onboard them. Otherwise, you will lose them.
Exactly. Especially with small teams, we don't have to know everything. And so what I've done with teams is say if someone comes in and there's actually not a process, it's like help write the process. We've been doing it this way. That's not necessarily the only way, but take this, own this to the extent that they have that ability and skill. But you know what? You create the process. You tell us what's the best way for us to be doing this as a team.
Hmm.
Because sometimes when it's a small team, you're moving very fast. You can provide kind of that outline, that blueprint, but I think it's good to engage others to say, like, let's build this process together. Let's evolve from where we are right now to where we want to be as an entrepreneur and owner. You don't always have to be the person who creates the process. It can be a collaborative effort.
That's a great point.
So, Alicia, over the last 18 years, what are some of the things that you're most proud of?
There's several things. There have been several challenges, but the things I think I'm most proud of are probably number one, writing a book. That was such a Herculean effort to write a book. And I would say the second thing is really what my book is based on, which is coming up with my own framework for business infrastructure. That also is something that you have to really put a lot of time and effort into figuring that out and packaging it in a way where it could be shared with others, taught to others. So I came up with this framework, Nikki, for creating business infrastructure. It's comprised of 7 elements. I wrote a book around those 7 elements, like literally detailing this is how you do it. And then I started a podcast, and now I'm actually talking to a couple of universities about creating courses around this framework. So those are some of the big highlights. And what's so funny, everything I just mentioned to you has only happened within the last 4 to 5 years. So think about that. Everyone who's listening to this right now, think about that. Really ponder on that. I've been in business almost 18 years, but a good 13 years went by before I even wrote the book. So I had to make sure that I had the knowledge. I couldn't have written this. The book that I have, Nikki, I could not have written that 2 years into the game. It would have been incredibly incomplete. So sometimes it takes, things have to be seasoned. You have to give yourself the time to gain these different experiences, to have worked with all of these different businesses, to have had exposure to so many different industries. Again, there's no way I could have written that 13, 14 years ago. But when the time was right, it was right. And I wrote the book. So for anyone who's listening, I know it can be so discouraging. Believe me, I know. You have these thoughts, you have these ideas, and they might be really big, audacious goals that other people just don't get, but keep plugging away at it. And when the time is right, all of the factors that need to come together to make that dream a reality, it will happen. Sometimes it doesn't happen in the time frame that we want it to happen. I know we want things quick, fast, and in a hurry, but in due time, in the right time, it will happen. Sometimes it can be so discouraging when you have these thoughts, these ideas, you want to see them through to fruition, and you just can't seem to find the right resources to rally around you to make it happen, because none of us are an island unto ourselves. We have to have other people to help us, other people who have maybe subject matter expertise that we don't have, that we have to rely on. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that you do have to give yourself time and grace in executing some of your dreams.
I love that, especially in today's social media driven world. It looks like you can just start a business in 90 days, right? And then, and that's true. You can start a business, but some of these real sustainable practices and sustainable success comes through that repetition, through lots of different experiences, like that seasoning that you talked about, that going through the cycles within a business. That is what creates that long-term success. So I really appreciate you saying that sometimes it just takes time. Sometimes you just have to keep working toward a goal, and you might not see that true success come until later. But when it comes, it's so sweet. And for you to say, hey, I've been in business for 18 years, but the first 13, I was in the trenches, right? And now that work is paying off for you. I do want you to talk about your 7 elements of your framework. But before we get to that, can you talk a bit about some stories from the clients that you worked with over your time? One of the most challenging ones to one of the most exciting ones. Pick a couple of case studies to share with the audience.
The challenges, maybe this would be a good place to start. I can remember working with a moving company. This was in that first set of clients long time ago. And that particular owner, through his own admission, I don't know if he was ever formally diagnosed as having ADHD, but he would always tell me, I have ADHD. I just can't sit still. I have to be in motion. And getting him to sit down for even just an hour was a big deal. And I had to start figuring out ways, Nikki, that I could quickly grab his attention and keep it, even if it was just for 30 minutes. And that's when I remember going to a teacher supply store one day, and I saw these little gingerbread stick figures, gingerbread people, and I created my own. I don't know if you can see this, but I'm holding up, for those who don't have the benefit of seeing us right now, I'm holding up a little stick figure, and it's laminated. This is something that I make. This is one of the exercises, Nikki, that I use with my clients now, ever since working with him, because he would just be all over the place and everybody would be so frustrated because we could never get him to sit down long enough to make any decision. And so I started trying to figure out, how can I grab his attention? So I'm at this teacher supply store. I see these gingerbread figures, and it inspired me to use this as a visual aid. So rather than just having him sit in a room and we're just going through a traditional, typical brainstorming exercise, what if I instead had these visual aids, things that people could touch, things that they could see? That is so much more impactful and so much more engaging than us just getting together in a room, staring at a whiteboard or an easel, and me writing everything down that they say. But if I instead, again, use these stick figures and index cards and we start moving things around, that's when you get people's attention. So that's a fun thing that I always like to talk about. It was turning something that could have ended up really horribly. I just could not figure out how to get certain information out of him because he was just always all over the place. You could never get him to sit still long enough to be able to have meaningful dialogue with him. Everything was in short bursts. And so figuring out something as simple as, well, what kind of visual aids can I start using to really grab his attention? That's one example. As far as something that did not go well, I can tell you any project that I have ever done with the government, the federal government, and I know you're in DC. Nikki, those don't tend to go very well.
Wow.
And I'll tell you why. I might get my hand slapped here, but when we talk about process, when we talk about being more efficient, more productive, when you think about it, those concepts are really antithetical to the government way of doing things. Government is very big, it's bureaucratic, it has lots of layers of management, and it can be a huge effort to try to get the simplest thing done or approved. I don't know if you want me to mention one organization in particular. I'm more than happy to.
Let's stick with large federal government.
Okay. So this is a large federal government entity that everybody has heard of. And at one point, I was literally asked to cease and desist my work because when you're doing process work, when you're trying to first figure out, okay, well, Nikki, tell me how you do what you do in the current state. And I start documenting that and I'm flow charting it out. And then I ask for approval. Is this a correct and accurate representation of the way things work today? They start to realize, this doesn't look good. This makes us look really bad. Even though it is an accurate representation of the way things are, it just wasn't a quote unquote good look. And although the project was designed to actually improve that process, they did not like the narrative that it was telling. And so I was literally asked, and they said, don't worry, we will pay you, but we need you to stop. Cease and desist what you're doing. That is the only time that has ever happened to me, was in the federal government space. And I remember being so upset about that because I, as well as with anyone, we come in wanting to make a difference. My personal mantra is to leave it better than I found it. Mm-hmm. And that was a situation where I could not honestly say that I walked away from something with it being in at least a better state than what I found it, because I couldn't do my work. And I remember talking with a friend about it, and he said, well, you have to keep in mind, the government does not have a profit motive. So there's no incentive for them to be more efficient, be more productive, make things a little bit better and easier for the people that are actually doing the work. There's no incentive. And ever since I've thought about what he shared with me, that is one type of client that I avoid like the plague. And again, there may be some people who do very similar work and they've had great experiences. These are just my experiences that I'm sharing. That is what I personally found. So I, again, try to avoid that type of client. But at the state and local level, I've had wonderful experiences working with local governments and even state institutions. I don't know, there's something about the federal level that is very interesting.
Right. And I will say every agency is different. So I will leave it at that. Every agency is different. I think there are agencies and executives who are interested in what the future looks like. So don't give up on all of them. And now the questions to ask going in. Like what I know as a business owner is you can't work with everybody. And
that is true.
You can discern that pretty quickly. Like they're not ready for me.
Yeah.
They're not ready for this transformation. And my time can be better spent elsewhere. And I think that leads us into talking about your 7 elements. So can you, one, tell us the title of your book and then share the 7 elements with us?
So the title of my book is called Behind the Façade: How to Structure Company Operations for Sustainable Success. And the reason I call it Behind the Façade is because when you think about it, Nikki, we can do a very good job at making things look really inviting and appealing with our businesses. Even if you don't have a physical storefront, Let's talk about maybe your web presence. And people go there and they're like, wow, this is great. Nikki must really know her stuff. But what they don't see, they don't know the things that are going on behind the curtain or under the hood. And it might be an absolute mess. So the whole point of the book is to operate on the inside as good as you look on the outside. That's all I'm advocating for. So we spend so much time marketing related activities. So publicity and branding and social media, all of these promotional things to draw customers or clients to us. So you're doing a great job at that. Well, I'm just saying, hey, you know what? Don't sleep on operations. Make sure that those same customers and clients that you are attracting to your business, just make sure that you can actually service them properly when they do arrive. And that's where your operations comes into play. The 7 elements of my business infrastructure framework, which is called Kasinu, by the way, it's 2 different ancient Egyptian words, which roughly translates into basically replicating or cloning the spirit or the essence of what makes your business so great in the first place. And it all starts with what I call a business parts analysis. So literally looking at the task level, what are all of the activities that are taking place in your business, no matter how mundane or how complex. And then you organize those tasks into departments. And then from there, you figure out who are the people who should ideally perform each of those tasks within each department. That serves as a foundation, Nikki, for all of the other 6 elements. So you take the people and the departments, and this is a second element where you create your organizational chart. So you figure out what is the best spatial arrangement or that chain of command, if you will, reporting structure for my company. And how can I get this down onto paper so that I can share this with other people as they join the team? Not only will they understand what the company looks like on the inside, but they can also understand what that path for potential promotion would look like in my company. The other thing is 2 additional elements have to center around records management. So whether you are talking about the way you store or file your electronic or digital records, as well as your physical records, you look at those departments that you've identified in the very beginning, and that literally serves as a foundation for how to organize your paper records as well as your digital records. What I mean by that is, for example, I know many people, many listeners might use something like Google Drive, or let's say Dropbox, or even OneDrive, something like that, some type of cloud storage system for your digital files. Well, if you're trying to figure out what is the best way for me to organize all of this information that I have, start with the departments that make up your company. So if you have marketing, operations, technology, human resources, management, legal, compliance, set up a folder for each of those departments, and then that serves as a kind of baseline way to start to organize your digital records. And then you would simply do the same thing with your physical records. There's workspace, your workspace logistics. So again, you understand the departments, you know the people that work within those departments. What is the best way to physically arrange your workspace? Even if those who are listening who might be solopreneurs, you might say, it's just me, I'm in this one room in my house. That's okay. In one corner of your room, that could be where all of your marketing related activities or information is. In another corner of the room, that could be everything that has to do with operations. Yet another corner of the room, that could be your little hub, if you will, for all of your team building and human resource related activities. The point is to get yourself into the habit of making sure that your physical workspace is arranged in such a way that it actually promotes productivity and efficiency rather than stifling it, making sure that work and information still flows as seamlessly as possible, even if you are just in one room. And then finally, the last 2 elements, those center around processes. So if you know what all of your tasks are that make up your company's day-to-day operations, how can you start to group some of those similar tasks together into processes? And that's ultimately what you want to document. Once you have all of those 7 elements in place, that is literally setting the foundation upon which you can continue to not only grow, but actually scale your operations.
I love that. So many reasons. I love the title of the book, Behind the Façade,
Thank
because
you.
I often say people look like they have a business and they just have a really nice website, right?
That's right.
Like all the things
That's
behind there
correct.
are aspirational.
Mhm.
And I think the other piece of this, even as you're getting into business, you don't know what you don't know, right? And a lot of times you find yourself having to create a process on the fly,
Yes.
or you're like, oh, someone's paid me. Now, what do I do? How do I onboard? What are all the elements? And particularly in my industry, there's a lot of contractual documentation that needs to happen. Again, these are things
Mm.
you don't know until you're well into it, and then you're like, "Oh, I probably need a lawyer right now because I need to look at
Mm.
these contracts. I need to send contracts." And underneath the hood, behind the face of all this, there is a lot, to use the term infrastructure, that actually needs to be in place to make sure that you can keep the machines running on a day-to-day basis, or even know what to hand off to who, so that if you're the face of the company, you can go out there and be doing great work, but all these other pieces are being taken care of. So
That's right.
definitely love that. And so when folks are just getting started, what would you say are the key processes that they need to have in place? Like if, say, someone listening, they literally are just getting started with their business and they're thinking, oh no, there's so much that I need to take care of. What are those 2 to 3 processes that everyone needs to have in place just to get started, to kind of have that baseline, then they can continue to improve upon?
I would say one of the first processes that you want to document is your, let's say if we're talking about a service-based business, your service delivery process. So from the moment you actually land that client, all the way to you providing the work, doing the work, completing the work, what does that process look like? In the process world, because I'm in Lean Six Sigma also, we usually describe that as an order to delivery process. So think about it. If you order something from Amazon, for example, there is a process from the moment we as customers place that order online all the way to the point of that product, whatever it is that we've ordered being delivered to us as customers. There's stuff that's going on behind the scenes that we as customers have no idea. We have no appreciation for what's going on behind the scenes. We just know what we experience. And that's what operations is all about. It's about what your customers experience, not necessarily what they see. So order to delivery, we might also refer to it as procure to pay. So from the moment you procure the business all the way up to the moment that you are actually paid, farm to table, that those kinds of concepts, right? And so for those who are actually on the manufacturing side where you're actually producing something tangible, it's the same thing. What is that manufacturing process? So from beginning to end, what does that process look like? I should point out really quickly, it's so interesting how people who make products, they get that. They get why it's so important to have process. But on the services side, we're like, well, why do we need that? What's the value? Well, if the manufacturers understand, wait a minute, the way I produce this pair of glasses needs to be the same every single time I do it. Why don't we as service-based businesses understand when I provide this particular service, it needs to be done the same way every single time, unless there's a problem or an issue and we need to tweak something or tinker with it in the background to make it better. But other than that, if it's something that works, it needs to be done the same way every single time. Another really important process is your lead to client conversion process. What are all of the things that you're doing from a lead generation perspective to bring people into your pipeline and then ultimately convert them into customers? What is it that you do? What's working? And whatever is working, start documenting that. Because here's the power of documentation. Once you've documented it and you actually start following it and being very intentional about following it, there's always room for improvement. So you can just keep making improvements along the way. And again, as you start to add other people to your team, they'll know exactly how to do what you've been doing also, the things that are working really well. So those are two really key processes that I would say. And then as a third, start documenting how you use certain technologies in your business. We're all using these digital technologies. Sometimes there are little tips and tricks and shortcuts that you figure out that it really would be great if you captured that somewhere. So just start documenting those things, because those are things that can be resident knowledge where if you were to go and read some information online, you might not quickly find it, but you know, because you've been working with a particular tool long enough. I'm just going to keep using Zoom as an example. You may have been using Zoom long enough and you figured out some things, and you can now document that and share that with other people as well.
Yeah, I think you hit upon three that are very, very important. And in particular, that last one, my team uses Teams, Office
Oh,
365,
okay.
and we built something that was useful for us. I was asking the team or sharing with the team that this is something to document because this could now be a service offering because they've
Oh,
spent so much time and built it out. And I'm like, this is really valuable for us. I'm sure other people would think is valuable as well. So also the other piece is we do have so many technological tools available to us. It's easy to start buying or subscribing to things that actually overlap.
mm,
And so
yes.
then you're paying twice for the same functionality. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like starting to document those things in order to, like, as you say, streamline, in order to, one, make sure, are we using the best tool? How do these two tools work together? So just thinking about how to use the technology better. I definitely love number one, the service delivery process. And what you said, I think it just hit home. Whereas if you're creating a product, you sell a product, you definitely map that out because you know each person in this supply chain has to understand what the end product is going to be, right? I
Yes.
think we intuitively understand that it's a tangible object. We have to make sure it comes out exactly as we want it. And I think conceptually, it's a little bit harder to think about a service in that way. It is a product, but
Right.
experienced differently, right? It is
Right.
experience versus something you can hold in your hand. I think that's really helpful to just really think about that. How do we ensure that every piece of this service is consistent? How do we
That's
make sure
exactly
it comes
right.
from like how you answer the phone to how you send emails to how you actually deliver the service and ensuring that everyone understands what the end state is?
Yes.
And I think that just really resonated with me just now as you were saying that.
Oh, good.
I learned so much on the podcast. It's just really great. We are rapidly coming to the end of our discussion, but there are two questions that I love to ask every one of my guests. So the first one is, what are one or two songs that are on your power playlist and why?
That is a hard question to answer, but I'm going to tell you two songs only because they're very high energy. And whenever I listen to them, I get amped up. And so most recently, that is Cool Off by Missy Elliott and Turn Down for What by Lil Jon. And whenever I hear those songs, it just gets blood flowing. I'm up on my feet and I'm moving around. They're really fun songs. I'm constantly listening to music all throughout the day, to be honest with you. Depending on the mood that I'm trying to evoke, I listen to classical music first thing in the morning. I listen to a lot of Sade. I listen to a lot of Billie Eilish. So I'm listening to music all throughout the day. But if I really want to get amped and charged, those are two songs on my playlist.
I love it. I love it. Besides your own book, what is one book that you would recommend to the listeners that has helped you thrive in business?
I have it here, Nikki.
Ooh,
How to
okay.
Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, written in 1936. That book I credit with helping me in my business more than anything. Why? Because we don't deal with businesses, we deal with people in those businesses. If you have excellent people skills, that is more than half the battle a lot of times. So I highly recommend that book for anyone. Even if you don't have a business, you need to read that book, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
I love that. We will add that to our show notes. So, Alicia, if people want to learn more about you, they want to buy the book, tell us how folks can reach out to you.
The best way, if you want to know more about me and the book and the podcast, my company, is to go to my personal website, which is aliciabutlerpierre.com. And when you go there, you'll see all that information. You'll see how you can buy the book. You can link over to my company's website. You can also find out about my podcast. And it also has links to all of my social profiles, of which I'm most active on LinkedIn. But yes, that's probably the best way if you want to learn just more about me and connect to some of those other resources.
Well, Alicia, it has been great being with you today. I appreciate your time. I've learned a lot. I know my listeners have as well. And I look forward to all the great things that you're going to do in the future.
Oh, Nikki, thank you so much. You are an excellent interviewer, I must say. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Coming from a fellow podcaster, I definitely appreciate that. But everyone, check out Alicia, aliciabutlerpierre.com. Check out her book, Behind the Façade. You definitely won't regret it. Alicia, thanks for being here today. Take care.
Thank you, Nikki.